August 1944, Brittany, France. There is a story they tell about Patton. Not the slapping incidents, not the speeches, not the ivory-handled revolvers. A quieter story, one that appears in no official record, no diary, no report, which, depending on who you ask, is either proof that it never happened or proof that it happened exactly the way Patton wanted it to. Here is what we know for certain. Patton's Third Army went operational on August 1, 1944, and immediately did what no Allied army had managed in 2 months of grinding hedgerow warfare. It moved fast. Armored columns covering distances in days that planners had budgeted in weeks. Patton bet Montgomery £5 his men would reach Brest, 200 miles away, in 5 days. The doctrine was simple: keep moving, don't stop, don't let the Germans regroup. Which is what makes the story so strange, because as the tale is told, somewhere on a Breton road that August, one of those columns stopped. No explosions, no firing, nothing, just stopped. The story goes that a corporal driving one of the lead supply trucks leaned out his window and saw the column ahead of him sitting dead in the road. He radioed forward. No answer. So he got out and walked. 200 yards ahead, Patton's Jeep sat in the middle of the road, and the general was out of the vehicle, standing on the shoulder, looking at something through the trees. Through a gap in the hedgerow, partially hidden, a low stone building, old, French, 3 stories, a hand-painted sign above the door, barely readable, Orphelinat Saint-Joseph, St. Joseph's Orphanage, and in the yard, standing very still, watching the convoy through a gap in the gate, children. As the story goes, Patton looked at the building for a long moment. Then he turned to his aide. "How far to the next objective?" 14 miles, sir. We should be there by... Give me an hour. This is the story of what happened in that hour, and why, if it happened at all, nobody ever put it in a report. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. New stories every week. To understand the world this legend lives in, you need to understand what Brittany actually looked like in August 1944, because that part is documented history. The liberation was brutal. 2 months since D-Day, fighting through every village, every hedgerow, towns changing hands, families separated, homes destroyed, and every school, hospital, and orphanage in the region trying to keep functioning under impossible conditions. Civilian institutions were surviving on whatever they had stockpiled and whatever they could beg. Help existed in theory. Allied civil affairs was setting up regional supply points behind the advance, but the advance was moving so fast that the paperwork could not keep up with the tanks. A real orphanage in Brittany that month would have been exactly what the story describes: full of children, short of everything, and invisible to an army with 14 miles still to cover. Into that documented world, the legend places St. Joseph's. As the tale is told, it had been operating since 1887, run by 4 nuns who refused to leave when the Germans came in 1940 and refused again when the Americans came in 1944. Their job was the children. Everything else was secondary. The director, the story says, was a Sister Marie Claire, 58 years old, 11 years in charge, with 31 children, 4 adults, and food for approximately 3 days. She had not expected help to arrive in the form of an American armored column stopping in her road. To be fair, nobody in the entire European theater expected Patton's column to stop for anything. The corporal, as the story goes, was still walking toward the jeep when he saw the general push through a gap in the hedgerow and head for the orphanage. His aide scrambled to follow. 2 MPs moved to flank him automatically, because that is what MPs do when a 3-star general starts improvising. One of the nuns was already at the gate, small, gray-haired, her habit dusty from the summer heat. The story says she looked at the 3 stars on the helmet without expression. "Parlez-vous anglais?" Patton asked. "A little." "You are general?" "Yes." "You stop your soldiers?" "For an hour." He looked past her at the children. 31 of them, the tale says, from maybe 4 years old to 14. Thin. Not starving, not yet, but moving in that direction. Clothes clean but worn, patched in multiple places. "You have food?" he asked, and the nun hesitated, pride fighting necessity, before she answered, "We manage." The legend says Patton had been around enough armies, enough supply lines, enough shortages to recognize the look on those faces. He turned to his aide. "Get me the supply sergeant." The sergeant in the story is a staff sergeant named Walsh, running the convoy supply section since Normandy, a man with 4 kids of his own back in Wisconsin. He arrived at the gate 60 seconds later, saw the orphanage, saw the children, and understood immediately. "What do we have, Sergeant?" "C rations, K rations, canned goods from yesterday's depot, bread, flour, sugar, powdered milk. How much can we spare without hitting our own shortfall?" Walsh counted the children the way a father counts. "A week's worth for this many, sir. We can cover it." "Do it." Within 10 minutes, as the story goes, soldiers were carrying boxes to the gate. Canned fruit, bread, 2 large tins of powdered milk, a sack of flour, canned meat. The nun stood watching, expression carefully controlled, hands clasped tightly in front of her. The children were less controlled. One small boy, maybe 5 years old, reached through the gate bars towards a can of peaches a soldier had set down. The soldier picked it up and handed it through without being asked. "Merci," the boy said. "De rien, kid." The soldier didn't speak French, the kid didn't speak English. It didn't matter. Now comes the part of the legend that explains why there is no record. The aide, the story says, came up beside Patton. "Sir, we need to log these supplies. The quartermaster will want an accounting." "Log them as field expenditure, spoilage, worn stock, whatever category covers it." "Sir, that's technically—" "Is anyone going to court-martial me for giving canned goods to 30 children in a French orphanage?" A pause. "No, sir." "Then log it however you need to." Here's your first question, and I genuinely want to hear it in the comments. An officer quietly falsifying a supply record to feed children, is that a violation of duty, or is that the whole point of duty? Because the Army has an answer, and I suspect most of you have a different one. The story gives the nun one more scene. She approached Patton while the boxes were still coming through the gate, stopped a few feet away, and looked at him the way a woman who has managed impossible situations for decades looks at a man who has just made her situation slightly less impossible. "Why you stop? Your soldiers. They have war." "We have 14 miles today." "We have them." "You did not have to stop." "No." She was silent a moment. "How long?" "The food." And he told her, "Ask the sergeant. He knows rationing. He'll tell you how to stretch it. Then contact Allied Civil Affairs. They're setting up regional supply points. You'll get on the list." "We did not know to ask," she said. "Now you do." Then, the tale says, she decided something and said carefully, "We pray for the soldiers, all of them, American and German. We pray everyone goes home." That's generous. It is what we do. He nodded once and walked back to his jeep. The engine started. The column began to move. The corporal watched the orphanage in his driver's mirror as they pulled away. The gate open, the nun standing in it, children beside her, the boy with the peaches raising his hand. The corporal raised his back. Then the hedgerow closed around it, and it was gone. The column reached its objective. The reports that evening covered the usual subjects: miles gained, resistance encountered, casualties, supplies consumed. Nothing about an orphanage, nothing about 31 children. And this is where the legend gets clever, because it explains its own silence. Walsh, the story says, buried the supply loss in a larger inventory adjustment, numbers nobody would question. The aide never raised it again, and Patton never mentioned it, not in his diary, not in a letter, because a general stopping his advance to feed an orphanage was not the image he cultivated. The image was the revolvers, the polished helmet, the conviction that the way to save lives was to end the war fast. That image is documented, and it was accurate. Whether it was the whole man, that is exactly the question this story exists to ask. As the tale is told, the only trace was 5 sentences in a nun's private journal. American column stopped. General of 3 stars. His men gave food. He spoke little. He seemed in a hurry but stopped anyway. I do not know why. The story claims that journal surfaced decades later and that this is how the tale escaped the orphanage walls at all. I'll be straight with you. No historian has ever produced that journal, and no Third Army record confirms that hour. This lives in the same territory as 100 other Patton stories, passed along because people wanted it to be true. Which raises the second question I want your opinion on. Does a story like this need to be documented to tell us something true about that army and those men, or is the wanting itself the evidence? The legend even gives the story an ending. The boy with the peaches, it says, was named Pierre. He grew up in the orphanage after it closed its gates for good in the 60s, became a carpenter, married, raised 3 children, and kept a photograph of an American GI on his workroom wall his whole life. Not anyone he knew, just a standard image from the liberation. Asked once what it reminded him of, he thought about it and said that kindness doesn't require a reason. The man who stopped didn't have to. He just saw that we needed something, and he stopped. And Walsh, the story says, went home to Wisconsin, worked in logistics for 30 years, and mentioned the orphanage to his wife exactly once. She asked if it was the right thing to do. We had it, he said. They needed it. What else is there? The advance continued. The war moved forward, and somewhere between the documented miles and the official reports, this story took root. 31 children eating American rations for a week because a general stopped his column for an hour, and nobody wrote it down. If it happened, that is the version Patton would have wanted. The thing done, and then done with. So here is the last question, and it's the real one. Forget Patton. You are in command of that column, moving fast, the war ahead of you. 14 miles to cover before dark, and every hour you lose might cost lives somewhere down the road. You see the gate, you see the faces. Do you stop? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to hear the story they tell about the time Patton turned his column around for one soldier nobody else would have gone back for, that one is next. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.